that was inducted in the beginning were coaches. And it tells me, you know, a little bit about what this area has always, you know, been about. And so when I came in tonight, the first person that I walked into, beloved, absolute, incredible human being and man, 54 grandchildren, 18 children to get those 54 grandchildren. Nobody else other than Don Benio could ever accomplish that. And I absolutely love the man because of what he meant to me in my life. You know, when you think about the Hall of Fame, I've had some great experiences. I had one the other night, and I just want to explain a little bit to you about, you know, the Springfield Basketball Hall of Fame. And one of the greatest players in the history of the game, obviously, or the greatest player in the history of the game, Michael Jordan, was inducted this year. And we've had an ongoing, you know, rivalry over the years, not me and him, but my teams and his teams. And he's an incredible, you know, athlete. He was probably the best of all time, and thus being inducted into the Hall of Fame. When he was introduced that night, he absolutely broke down in tears, and it took him about a minute and a half or 3 minutes just to get himself composed before he could give his speech. And I was part of it. I don't know if any of you got to hear about it, but he actually gave me credit for being one of the few people in his life that would raise his level of competition. And I can explain to you why. Is that when I went to the New York Knicks and started to coach there after I left the Lakers, one of the greatest rivalries we had was the rivalry with the Knicks and the Chicago Bulls. But the one thing about the Knicks at that time is we could never have beaten them. We lost 12 consecutive games to the Chicago Bulls over the course of 2 or 3 years. And I was always trying to find a way to get my players to believe, to absolutely believe they could beat Michael Jordan, because he had something even greater than his talent, which was his heart and his will, and this incredible competitive desire to win. And he would take normal to another level when somebody on the other team would have the audacity to, you know, raise his ire with some kind of comment in the paper, or if he would say something to one of his teammates or one of his players to do something to try to stop him. So he really took this challenge. And so we had not beaten them 12 consecutive times, and we're playing them. They had just won the World Championship the year before, and we're playing them in the first round, or the second round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. And we're in Chicago Stadium, and there's no doubt that I've got to do something. You know, I'm coaching, I've got to say something, figure out a way to get these players to believe, like Walt, or like Eddie, or like Larry, or all of these coaches that are in this Hall of Fame that have done, you know, for us over the years, something to spark them. So there was one common thread that had gone through the entire 12 games, and as I watched a ton of videotape to come up with a common thread, I noticed that Jordan, on a regular basis, would, you know, just drive the ball from half court, get to the top of the key. You know, he'd stick out his tongue, he'd lick his shoulder like Michael, you know, only could, and he would dunk over the top of our players. And all he did was dunk and dunk and dunk and dunk. And he must have probably dunked at least 25 or 30 times in those 12 games with impact. And so I took all of these dunks, and as I was addressing the players prior to going out onto the court, I said, I want to show you something, because we're going to have to get, you know, our act together tonight, and we're going to have an understanding that when we go out on the court tonight, that our attitude simply has to be a lot different than it's been in the past. And so as I turned on the videotape, and there was one dunk after another, one dunk after another, one dunk after another, and there were 12 players, you know, sitting in front of me, and then all of a sudden you could see them begin to smile. You know, they saw another guy get dunked down, and then they smiled, and then they saw another dunk, and they started to high-five one another. You know, really, they started to high-five each other, watching Michael Jordan dunk over the top of them, and before you knew it, they were really jumping up and down, you know, on their feet, you know, trying to tell everybody just how good this guy was and how much they were doing him. That's not the kind of message that I wanted to try to get across, you know, to my players, you know. And I said, let me tell you something that's going to happen tonight. And this is the truth. This is a true story. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen tonight. He's going to get the ball in the first quarter somewhere at half court. He will get the ball. He will dribble to the top of the key. he will then stick his tongue out, and as you get down in the defensive stance and level him off, you know, you're going to be looking at him. He's going to be driving by you. He's going to raise in the air at the dotted line, and then there's going to be 1,000 flashballs that are going to go off. And you're going to become Michael Jordan's 1994 Nike poster boy. Is that what you want? And they all said no, and it was incredible. I mean, they went from absolute reverence to disdain, and they jumped up in the air, and they ran out, and I said, I got him in a great state of mind. This is going to be a super game tonight. Sure enough, first quarter, half court, top of the key, tongue out, lick his shoulder. Defensive player is playing him, he's leveling him off, and then just as the flash bulbs were to go off, the defensive player runs out of the frame. He does not want to be in the picture. It's true. Just got out of the frame, got out of his way, just let him go down. And I take the timeout, timeout. I take sort of an abusive, crazy timeout. You can do that then, you can't do it now. And I bring him over, I said, what did I tell you? We're not going to do that. I said, what did you get out of his way for? And he said, do you think I want to be Michael Jordan's 1994 Nike poster boy and be on the wall of every 9-year-old in this country? No. You know, so, you know, you learn things about Michael. But somewhere along the way, we did learn from that. And the best ever, the greatest ever, you know, paid sort of tribute to a team that would step up and challenge him. And the only thing that I ever tried to get any of my players to do with players like that players that could dream of being like that. And nobody ever knows, none of you will ever know that you're ever going to be as good as that until you are as good as that. And that's the opportunity that I think you get. And you get these opportunities in places like Schenectady, New York, where 8 or 9 of the first 10 people ever inducted into the Hall of Fame, you know, were coaches. And so when I look back, I always say to my players now, I always had this phrase that if you want to ever truly win, and win big, then you have to meet players like Michael Jordan at the rim. You don't play him on the court, because that's where he's going to be. I think it's a metaphor for life. You know, whatever you do in your work, whatever you do in life, is that you got to meet these people at the rim. You got to get up there with them. You got to have a philosophy and a plan, and a pride and a practice and a perspective each and every day of your life about what real competition is, you know, when it comes to being a winner. And, you know, when I think about the opportunities that I've had, and I go back, and one of the things about this town that is so special for me, I came back on Saturday. I drove from Springfield, and as I was driving down to the hotel, I stopped on Lafayette Street. I used to go to school, St. Joseph's Academy, and it has since, obviously, for many, many years now, been demolished. And I pulled into the parking lot, and there's a mental health clinic behind it. I pulled into the parking lot, and I turned my car around, and I stared the car right at St. Joseph's Church. And it was staring right at the little gray door, the metal gray door. There's a metal gray door right there. Any of you who ever went to St. Joseph's Academy knows that if you ever, during recess, left the sidewalk and went downtown, you went into the convent steps and spent most of your time down there. And I stared for like an hour. I just stared at the church, and I took the environment back in, about a place where I was raised and I grew up. And I go back and I think about why it's the way it is, and why I can come back here, 45 years later, and still see the same people that have decided to live, in this city, raise their families, run their businesses, have grandchildren, continue to support, any program that can be supported in this city to try to make this city better. And what's going to be needed, as we move with Dick and we move with Mike in 1954, Mount Pleasant and Knott Terrace, is that there's going to have to be a new taproom, somewhere along the way. I mean, the list of Hall of Famers is now going to go up into the balconies up here. And to be able to get our children to make sure, and to get the young people to make sure that they simply take this incredible pride and where they have come from and who taught them.